So just so you understand kind of how this got started, California Department of Education allotted, we actually did a competitive grant. We were awarded the $30 million. We partnered with the Butte County Office of Education because part of our grant requirements were to scale also in rural California. How many of you are in rural California? Okay, several of you. Your needs are way different than the needs in Orange County, California. And my context and where I live is very Southern California centric. And so we purposefully partnered with Butte County Office of Education, who has a really strong grasp across the state. 40% of our districts are rural districts, which is huge to us. And so although I come from Orange County, and people kind of think, well, Orange County, that's the real OC, that's where, you know, the beaches and everything, 60% of our students actually come from poverty. And so we deal with a different demographic of poverty and language and things like that. The first week that I partnered with Butte County Office of Education, Susan Huckinen, my colleague, we actually did a visit to Berry Creek Elementary School District so she could show me what reality is in rural California. And it was interesting for me because when you go to rural California, you're kind of already doing inclusive education. You just have to, right? You don't really have a choice. So it was interesting. I've learned a lot from my rural colleagues that I've been able to apply to the work that we're doing here. You'll also see Swift Education Center on here. Swift is from the University of Kansas. We partnered with them specifically because they had already an evidence-based and research practiced framework for scaling MTSS. They had been given a grant from the Office of Special Education out of the federal government to work in 5 different states with their state departments of education to create an MTSS framework. So they had a lot of the work that you'll see that I'll introduce in a bit comes from their framework, and we use that so we didn't have to start from scratch. So we were able to take the framework that the Swift Center from the University of Kansas had developed and make it personalized for California. And they've been our partners along the way in this journey. So if you're familiar with a big name in special education, Wayne Saylor, he's been at the table with us this whole time. And Amy McCart is his co-director at the University of Kansas who have been with us at this. Any of you have heard of Wayne Saylor? Lots of nods in here. Okay. Yeah, he's like, I call him the grand poobah of special education and special education reform. If you're looking at needing some good research on inclusive practices, look up Wayne Saylor. He's got some really good work out there. So our theory of action that we have and our outcomes that we're looking for this work that we're doing. And so just so you know, the grant started in 2016 and we collect data through 2020. We're looking at achievement gains for all students. We're looking for what we call whole system engagement, and I'll talk to you about that in just a minute. We really come from an assets-based approach. We build on what's successful and uniquely good and alive in districts and in schools, and we go from there. We don't come from a deficit model of what schools and districts are doing wrong. We say, what are you doing right? Why is it working? And how do we scale that better? And then we implement a framework of 5 evidence-based domains and 10 features, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Really, the goal of all of this work is to connect it back to our local control funding formula and our LCAP plan. So if all of your districts should have a local control accountability plan that sets out the goals and the actions on how they're going to meet the needs of all students in your district, and it ties their funding that they get from the state to that LCAP. We look for supporting student success in the least restrictive environment that fosters the greatest inclusion. We leverage multiple school and community resources, and then we implement a multi-tiered, evidence-based, data-driven, district-wide and school-wide system of academic, behavior, and social-emotional support, and make sure that MTSS is embedded into the LCAP. And so that is really actually a measurement we're looking at is from where we started with districts, if MTSS was never mentioned, to where we are now as they redo their LCAP every year in their annual update, we should start seeing growth and mentioning of MTSS or evidence domains and practices that relate to MTSS. So we'll talk about that in a second. So what is MTSS? It is not a place. Kids don't get put into MTSS. It is a comprehensive framework designed to provide technical assistance for districts and schools to support addressing them in their most inclusive and equitable learning environment. We specifically call out academic behavior and social emotional separate, and we see that the three have to work hand in hand in order for it to actually happen. And we also say that you have to start with behavior and social emotional learning if you ever think academics are going to thrive for kids. We specifically separate out behavior and social emotional learning as well, because in the work and the research that we've done, behavior is a manifestation of the lack or the growth in your social emotional learning skills. And so we really call out what are the social emotional learning skills that kids need in order to have positive proactive behaviors. So universal support is that we use evidence-based priorities and practices that support the academic and behavioral social emotional success of all students. Supplemental is additional support that's needed, and intensified is targeted support for a few students with greater needs. And it's for a limited amount of time when you move into the some students or the few students based on need and based on data. So here's just another way to look at it as well, that it's throughout all of it, as you're planning your multi-tiered system of support, you're using universal design for learning, you're using differentiated instruction, and you're using an integrated content and service delivery system. So as you're planning, if you're planning universal design for learning for all students, even when you move into the some students need supplemental support, you're still looking at universally designing your lessons for them, because all of our kids come with unique characteristics, and we need to be planning to match their needs to the needs of our instruction. And so it's not just cookie cutter every time you plan a lesson. You really need to have your roster out and think about, what assets do all of my kids bring to me, and what am I going to do to make sure that their learning and the content that I need them to understand is going to be best delivered through their modalities. And they're all unique. And if you don't sit down with your roster and plan that way, we miss the boat. And we miss the boat big on school climate. And so if we're not planning instruction that way, and we haven't created inclusive classrooms that celebrate all of our uniqueness and our neurodiversity, we do no service to any of our students. So I'm just going to ask for some initial reactions from the room. And I think we need to use a microphone, right, because we're recording? So wait for the microphone to come to you. Go ahead.
Hi. This graphic kind of seems like it might be fluid. It could be fluid. Mm-hmm. It's not balanced like that in my district, but however, the previous graphic for the RTI system was just, there was no option to go fluid, really.
Right.
It was just to the top, and, really, there was no flow.
Yeah. So people have actually started to call the middle line the escalator, that you just move up and down it as you need things. Go back and forth. Yeah. What else? Oh, sorry.
I'll just share my reaction. My reaction is, wow, this looks awesome and amazing, but how? Like, this is it's a lot of great buzzwords, but I don't see the reality.
I'm gonna get to the how in a minute. Okay.
I see this as a potential financial burden, and I don't understand where the financial part of this is going to come into play.
Talk to me more about that. Why is this a financial burden?
Well, we already don't pay our teachers enough money, and if we're going to motivate the teachers to be able to teach in this fashion, there has to be some kind of motivational incentive to do that. So whether it be financial or promotional, still, I can't wrap my brain around how this is going to work.
So I'm just going to put something out there to ponder. Teachers are all beholden to the California standards for the teaching profession. This is built right into it. Everything that is in here is already required for teachers to be able to do. General education teachers. But okay, so So I'm not going to go into this. They don't do it and all that kind of stuff. But hold on. Hang on. Go ahead.
I don't know if this is answering your question because I'm a parent.
Uh-huh.
I'm a social worker and I work in policy and I'm not an employee of the district or a district. So a couple of thoughts. There was a question in the video, be part of the movement. So then I thought, okay, how is parents and community be part of this movement, right? In order to be part of the movement, there has to be accountability and transparency. I would say as a special ed parent, I feel that there's a lack of accountability and a lack of transparency. So being a special ed parent, you wouldn't say, come to his district and say, what services can you offer my son? These are his challenges. They're probably not gonna say, these are the long list of services. They're gonna say, oh, that's individualized, right? So for me to feel like this is actually implementable or can be implemented, which I've asked my district, okay, you guys have committed to this, what does that look like? And have not got a clear answer as to what that's gonna look like or what that will look like in our district. And so accountability and transparency is big. And so is there gonna be, okay, this is what we're committing to for the universal support. These are the things that we are committing to in this section of universal support. In the classrooms, we're gonna, follow like a way of teaching that's going to allow all learners to have access to, all the different types of learning.
So if you're
you
doing,
teachers know.
if you're doing universal design for learning,
Yes.
then
Is that going to be,
part
it
of
needs
it.
to be really clear because from a parent perspective, from a community perspective, it does seem like a lot of buzzwords and fluff talk. It sounds very policy wonky, which is wonderful. It sounds like pie in the sky. I'm all for it. How can it be done?
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll get there. Yep. We are not there. We are nowhere near there, but we'll get there. So, and I'll address it in a little bit.
So I know I'm another parent, and I was really glad to have an educator next to me, but I don't know where everybody else in the room is at, but my kids are probably in the few students category, and they're probably in the needing lots of support part of that category. So to me, I look at it and I'm like, this doesn't really look like it's going to change anything at all for my students. They're probably going to still spend most of their day away from peers in their grade level, and so I'd be interested to know for the, all means all, but except if you really, really, really need help.
Yeah.
Then it doesn't really mean you.
Right.
So
We'll talk about that.
I just have to include too, because you made a pivotal statement for me, and I am an educator. And you said, if you don't have your rosters out planning, then we're missing the mark. So I'm going to be brutally honest, but the shift is going to be hard, I believe, because to get the social emotional support and the behavioral support in place to where you can make the shift to where the teachers have the energy to actually plan after they're done working all day is going to be hard.
I agree.
Because we need our self-care and we need our lives. And when I work all day and I'm working with the specialized population I already work with, I go home and I'm tired and I want to live a little. So I respect this approach and I'm excited for it, but I don't know how the heck we're going to get there.
No,
Please help me. Help me understand.
got it. Yep.
At first blush, I feel that this is going to be extremely difficult to implement, especially when teams change every year. It would be different if you had the same team year after year who could learn your child, understand their strengths and weaknesses, or at least have the continuity of a case manager that moves with them year after year. As I'm a parent, right? But the reality is, I've had 4 different teams, 4 different years.
Yeah.
So I don't see this changing my students' outcome.
One there, and then we'll continue on.
So I kind of see how much it is advantageous for the teacher to make it look good on the paper at the end of the school year. Oh, I met all my goals. even though maybe my grandson didn't quite make all those goals. She wants it to be good and sound good, and so she writes down that he made those goals.
I'm a parent, and for kindergarten, my son attended a school that was one of the inclusive practices sites for our district. And he's probably in that few students, but there was never a question of whether or not he belonged in a general education classroom. But like the teacher was saying here, he probably wore his teacher out. And at the end of the year, a few days before the end of the school year, she said, we're not questioning whether or not he belongs in general education, but I'm not willing to have him in my classroom next year. And that's my concern, that there will be teachers that question whether or not a student's least restrictive environment is general education, because it's a lot on the teacher. And I want to acknowledge that, and also see what can be done that it doesn't lead to more kids having their LRE be changed because it's wearing the teachers out.
Right. Yep. So this really is tied to district local accountability plans. So just know, as parents or community members, or where your role is in making sure that you understand your district's plan, and being at the table and being at the forums and being part of that equation of talking about how do we make sure that all students are included, and that that's part of a local control accountability plan, and that local control funds are being designated that way. So if we know that teachers need more professional learning in this area, there should be dollars from the district associated to teacher professional learning. But if teachers and if principals and if parents aren't talking about that and advocating for that, I can honestly tell you a local control accountability plan, because I read them for all of Orange County, usually gets written by one person based on their level of expertise. And yes, we have community forums, and yes, we talk about this, and yes, we talk about that. But when I go around the state and I ask teachers, do you even know what's in your local control accountability plan? And they tell me, what's a local control accountability plan? And I say, wow, do you know that a local control accountability plan is being written about what you're supposed to be doing in the classroom, and you've had no input into that? Might want to think about that. Okay, just because a couple of your union members may have been at the table during some of those meetings doesn't mean your voice is in that local control accountability plan. That is going to be the driver for this. So be involved. As parents, read it. Make sure you understand what the district is saying that they're offering all students in your district, and especially your own students. And if you're not represented in there, you need to go to meetings and you need to advocate, because that's where it's going to come down to. That's where our funding is coming from, and that's our decision-making document. I know you're looking, but it is the only way we're going to make change. It really is. I understand that. And here's the biggest thing that I'm going to tell you from somebody who, has to work on this on a daily basis, is stakeholders are supposed to be at the table. That was the whole change in why we had local control funding and why we do LCAPs. It's supposed to be stakeholder-driven and locally controlled. And if you're not at the table, keep knocking on that door, because that is what the funding is supposed to be for. It's supposed to be to meet your local needs. So when we say this, when we look at whole system engagement, okay, and I have to caution that this funding was just given in 2015 or 2016. When you look at implementation and implementation science, I know everything sounds pie in the sky right now. You're not going to see these changes in your districts for 5 to 7 years. And as parents, you're like, wait, my kid's graduating in 5 to 7 years. So what does this matter to me? Okay, you can start helping make the transition though. So use your advocacy and your voice to help push this forward. So we look and say that truly the reason why we do the work that we do, why we are in public education, is because students and the family are the purpose of our work. You are why we all have jobs. The school is supposed to be the place of transformation. The district is the point of intervention. Our work has completely centered on the district as the point of intervention, because unless the district has strong policies and practices to support what we're talking about here, the school has no way of being a place of transformation. If a principal is not getting the supports they need, that principal is not able to support the teachers at their schools. So the work we've done over the last 2 years has been working with district-level administrative teams to really push on them to say, do you have inclusive policies and practices to make sure that all students have equitable access to learning? And so far, what do you think the answer has been? No, it has not been. It's been no. And it's been no, and how can we do this better, okay? So just know it's happening, but this is going to take a monumental change of time, mindset shifts, and a change in the way we do business as educators. So as your parents sit in these seats, I feel for you. I mean, I look at my own 2 children. My children are getting the same education I got 30 years ago. It hasn't changed for them. And I look at them and say, it's probably not going to change for another 10 years. But the best I can do right now is be a public advocate for it and do everything I can do in my power to remove barriers to make this happen. So there are a lot of warriors out there like me trying to make this happen. This is the first time actually in the state of California that all of our systems have been aligned from the state level down to the school level, from the policy level to the community-based organizations, all getting behind that we do this in the benefit of kids, not adults. This is the first time. And we actually, for the first time in 15 years, have permission to do whatever it takes to get the job done. Okay, so just know there's a shift happening, okay? There is a shift happening. It does take time. So then we look and say the county, the region, and the state are the source of technical support. And so I'm from a county office. My job is to support my districts, who then go support their schools to make sure that our students and families' needs are being met. How are we doing this? So with the funding that we got, so $30 million, $22 million went out into local grants for districts. And so over the past 2 years, we've trained over 300 districts in this new way of thinking. And it's been at the district level, right? So you start at the district level, and then you'll start to see it go down into the school site level. And so that's been over the last, not even 2 years, about 18 months. In the fall, we have another 300 districts coming on board to engage in this new way of thinking. And so when you look at this graphic here, there's 1,024 districts across the state of California. So in 2 years, we are going to reach 600 of those 1,000. And hopefully, the 400 who didn't apply, or the charter schools, we know there's another 1,000 charter schools, and we do have charter schools involved in the work right now, but there's another 1,000 public charter schools as well. We're hoping that those who didn't apply for grant funding, because it comes with 5 days of intense training over a 6-month period, to go deep and look to see what are your systems doing that are assets-based, what are producing great things, and where do you have some areas of growth? And let's focus in on where do we go next? And so that's the work districts have been doing over the past 6 to 8 months. And we are measuring this, and we're assessing it, and we're holding them accountable. So I'll talk to you about in a minute about how we're doing that. So when we talk about a multi-tiered system of support, we're not just talking about the 3 levels. We're not just talking about universal supports, supplemental supports, and intensive supports. In order for a multi-tiered system of support to work, you actually have to have really strong family and community engagement. You have to have strong administrative leadership. You have to have an integrated education framework, and that means you're pulling in all the different best resources and tools to make sure that all students have universal access based on their needs. And then you have to have inclusive policies and practices. And that goes down to your district level leadership and sometimes even at the state level. If we have policies and practices that are not inclusive, we need to change. We also find that sometimes people think things are policies that truly aren't policies. They are just the ways we go about doing business. And the way we go about doing business is not always good for kids. And sometimes we have to go back to policy to say, what does the policy say we're actually supposed to be doing? And if the policy that also creates barriers, that's our job as state advocates and at the legislature to change those policies and listen to our community to say this isn't working anymore. The old way of doing things does not work in the 21st, almost 22nd century, right? So just so you know, if you go to our ocde.us/MTSS website, you can actually pull down cohort 1, cohort 2, and cohort 3 and see if your district is on there. If your district is not on there, they have complete access to all of our resources for free. Our training materials are actually going to be posted in the next week as completely open source, okay? So this is what your districts are learning right now. They're looking at this and saying, and I'm going to look at my teacher here, if I really have a strong educator support system, am I providing access to instructional coaching? Does that mean that if my teacher here is struggling with how do I do universal design for learning, am I providing her with the supports to plan on the front end on how to look at my lesson differently to make sure that the needs of all of my students are being met, not just targeting and putting out fires as things are happening, right? Am I really providing those supports? And if she's struggling in an area or wants to learn from another teacher, am I providing her the release time to go do that? Am I providing her a voice on my campus, or do I shut my door when she comes by, right? So those kind of things. We're looking, at making sure that we're seeking input. We look at family and community engagement. Are we really asking our families for input and feedback and actually using input and feedback? It's one thing to ask. It's another thing to actually use it, okay? Are we providing or facilitating homeschool communication? Are we looking at mutual interests and goals? Are we making sure there's reciprocity there? Or is it one way? Like I tell you everything and you don't get to tell me anything? Okay, so just so you know, this is what your districts are learning right now. They're doing self-assessments on how are they doing in these areas, and then we actually have an outside evaluator that will come in, look at their self-assessment based on interviews with parent community members, teachers, things like that. We do a crosswalk to say, if what you're saying is what you're doing, is that really reality? And then we work with them to say, this is what we're seeing, this is what you're saying, let's talk about this for a minute. So, in the state of California, we're actually looking at what we call a statewide system of support. So the shifts in California's approach to improvement. So before local control funding formula, and we can kind of say during No Child Left Behind, We had top-down transactional exchanges focused on schools in isolation. We had packaged approaches for interventions. We would give you curriculum, we would throw things at you, we would bring experts in, and we would say, this is how it's going to fix you. We had isolated team decision-making, we had contradictions between state and federal programs, and we had the assistance we were offering to our local districts and schools that didn't actually match their local context. Just because it was working over here does not mean it's going to work over here. We were not doing any universal design for learning for our districts, plain and simple. In our new shift under local control funding, and you'll hear the governor, the state superintendent, and those who are running right now are still advocating for this too. We do things the California way. We are the most diverse state in the nation, and we have to do things differently here. So what we've moved to within the state of California, and just know this is in an infancy stage, okay? So this is, LCFF went into place in 2014, but really kind of these shifts that we're seeing are really almost just being implemented this year. And so now we see support providers working along districts side by side, coming in and saying, how can I help you? What can I help you get better at? We're looking at tailored approaches. We're looking at engaging with our local communities, streamlined processes, and then just our assistance and support is all tied to our local control plan. That should be our guiding document. You'll see, are you familiar, like there's this dashboard now for the state of California, and it's kind of showing you how districts are doing. And so we have this level of support for our districts where level 1 is kind of all. It's our universal support. Like, what do all districts get? So all districts get a guiding framework for different curricular areas. They get standards for the teaching profession. They get standards for administrators. They get professional learning based on these things. Now, some districts might not do well with all of those universal supports being provided for them, so they'll get what's called differentiated assistance. This went into place last fall. Districts were identified by not meeting different student populations that they weren't serving, and lo and behold, what student population do you think most districts weren't serving and showed up on the dashboard? You all tell me. Students with disabilities. 225 districts in the state of California were recognized in need of additional support from their county office or outside providers. 187 of those districts were specifically in need of assistance for students with special needs. Due to school climate, which means suspension, and academics. Our students with special needs are being suspended at higher rates than other students. On top of that, now look at what we talked about earlier. Our students with special needs are also over-identified as English learners, students in poverty, and African American. So, factor all this together, 187 districts across the state of California in the first year that were identified for differentiated assistance were identified for needing to do a better job at meeting the needs of special education students. Okay, so we've got some work to do. And you're all nodding your heads because you know that. Those are your babies. And we're working hard to change that system. What you'll see here is, and I just kind of pull this one out, I know you probably can't read this. These are all the different supports that our statewide system of support says are offered. And if you look, our multi-tiered system of support grant is considered a level 1 support to get all districts on board with providing an appropriate multi-tiered system of support. So it's built into our statewide system of support. It's not going away. It's here to stay. So you were asking me, how do you hold your districts accountable? So we're holding them accountable 2 ways. and we actually collect data on this. And so there's 2 different self-assessments that your districts do. One is called the Local Education Agency Self-Assessment, and the other one is to do at the site level called the Fidelity Integrity Assessment. And it's based on looking at those domains and features that you see in the middle of your guide there. This just goes through the cycles of improvement that we're looking at. Talk to you about implementation science. Improvement science is once you identify where you need to build up some areas or look at a root cause, you go through and you kind of go through this cycle of improvement on why is this happening and how am I going to study this to get better at it. So the LEA self-assessment that your districts look at is to look at these 6 areas: clear and collaborative relationships, shared belief, missions, and visions, teaching, learning, and assessment, leadership and governance, professional development, and infrastructure alignment. I'm just going to kind of go quick through these. Look, it's based on implementation science. But just so you see, this is what a district kind of looks at. There's areas that they'll rate themselves on. And so this is just one. Component 5 is infrastructure alignment. And do they have a development of a data system for school improvement? And is it comprehensive? And so they'll go through and there's these guiding questions that they ask. There's a rating scale that they rate themselves on for all 6 of these areas. This is normally facilitated with somebody from a county office of education. And I can tell you, in the districts I've worked in, there are 6 components to it. It probably takes us 6 days to get through. One component, just based on the level of discussion you end up having as a district level leadership team, because you're trying to decide, am I laying the foundation or am I installing, and the different perspectives of no, we're at continuous improvement and sustainability, and somebody else in the district says, no, we're not, we're at laying the foundation, where have you been? The dialogue that comes out of this, and then the planning that happens after it, is what you should start seeing your districts. Changes in your district should be happening now because they're engaging in this self-study that's facilitated. Here's just some samples of the reflective questions that are in there. This is online too. You can Google search the LEA self-assessment and look at it and see what this looks like, what your districts are being asked to do. This is part of their grant requirements, is to actually take this twice a year until the year 2020, and we're expecting to see growth over time. That they should be moving from laying the foundation to at least towards implementing. Maybe not continuous improvement yet in 3 years, but they should be kind of moving towards that implementation phase. At the school site level, for schools to get better, they use a tool called the Thea, and this is from the Swift Education Center. And this is a school self-study. It's also a facilitated administration with a school-level leadership team. Parents should be involved in that school-level leadership team, okay? So ask your district if they're involved or your school site is starting to implement MTSS. When you take the Thea, can I be part of that? Parents are supposed to be at the table. Just ask. See what they say. They shouldn't say no. We'll see. These are the domains and features that the Thea looks at. Again, it's based on implementation science. And just here's an example. If you're looking at sustaining administrative leadership, and you're looking at this domain of valued leadership, if you were fully at that, we are in continuous improvement, you would see that your school leadership team meets at least monthly. That should be happening. That your school leadership team includes administrators, general educators, special educators, or specialists, and other student services. That your school leadership reviews and uses student school performance data regularly. That it functions and monitors its own effectiveness. So these are the things that they're self-assessing them on, and then they go in and there is actually a whole online portal that they put their scores in, and we're tracking their growth over time. So again, the goal of all of this is to make sure that all students have access to the most inclusive and equitable learning environment. I hope you all see that we are just laying the foundation for this, that a change cycle takes 5 to 7 years, and I know for parents that's hard to grasp and take in right now when your babies are the ones that are being affected by this the most. But do know that as a state, we are committed to this. And from the State Department of Education to the county offices of education to your districts who have decided to apply for grant funding to be part of this, they truly are believing in the shift in education that we're looking for and meeting the needs of all students in the most inclusive and equitable learning environment.
The UC Davis Mind Institute was created in 1998 with a promise to find cures for neurodevelopmental disorders. Every day, our physicians and researchers come closer to fulfilling that promise. Their groundbreaking research on autism, Fragile X syndrome, chromosome 22q11.2 deletion syndrome, ADHD, and other brain disorders are helping children achieve their fullest potential. Please visit our website to find out more about current studies, upcoming events, and how you can help make a difference.